97 South's Storytellers features conversations with professional songwriters and seeks to pull back the curtain on the art, craft, and career of songwriting. We'll bring you to those magical moments of creativity that have delivered the inspiring songs that make up the soundtrack of our lives. I'm Paul McGuire, and today we're excited to welcome to the 97 South Storytellers podcast inside the Desert Star Theater, Golden Globe and Oscar-nominated director and screenwriter Neill Blomkamp. Neill is the creative force behind iconic films like District 9, Elysium, Chappie, and the recent hit Gran Turismo. Known for his unique blend of socio-political commentary and cutting-edge technological artistry, Neill's stories often focus on underdogs fighting for their place in a challenging world and the triumph of the human will and spirit. While we typically focus on songwriting and music on this show, Neill's filmmaking offers a compelling look inside another vital form of storytelling. I hope you enjoy our conversation. I sure did. When somebody would come into the studio 25 years ago, the only research you could do was like the last interview they did with Rolling Stone or the last interview they did with Entertainment Weekly or something like that. And so there was a reason to do the interview. Yeah. You are learning. Tell me about what the new project and what you've been doing for the last 2.5 years with your life.
I think about this a lot.
Everybody expects you. Now when I get a country artist that comes into my studio, they expect me to know that their dog died this morning. You know, and it's insensitive if I don't.
Or it's also the other way around, which is that I mean that's kind of unusual actually. The artist expects you to be up to date.
They expect me to know everything already,
right?
And it looks like you haven't done your prep if you don't.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah, so it's like you have to be up to date with the Twitter feed, or
you really do. I mean, and working in radio that changes every day, and sometimes in top 40 mediums, you'll play the same artist a couple of times during a shift. There's only so much new stuff out there, and it's not always updated on a website or in an article or something like that. So social media serves a purpose that way. But conversely, excuse me, when they come in, everybody, including their publicists and labels and studio people, if you're doing films, they expect you to know everything about the project before you sit down with the person you're going to talk to about the project.
Yeah, I mean the way I think of it is more from the audience side, like specifically in film. Yeah, it's like in the 80s or the 90s, or even to some degree the first part of the 2000s. Information was very difficult to come by, so it made films events, and it made them very. Sort of the information was very sought after, and it was incredibly novel when you could get it. Yeah. And what's happened now, just with the overload of data that we have, is that there's no uniqueness, right? It's not special anymore.
Everybody's got the picture of the cast on set doing whatever it is, where to see behind the scenes with Ridley Scott on the set of Alien, you're like, oh my God, that's what it looked like. Yeah, exactly. And it was that you'd spend literally hours looking at a picture. Yeah. Because it took you were seeing behind the curtain, and now all it is behind the curtain. I'm partly responsible for that because I've been an entertainment reporter for a long time.
And some of the films from those eras are actually to some degree a little bit still like that, right? Yeah. Because they didn't document them to the same degree. So even with the internet, you still can only get a fraction of the amount of behind the scenes that people are used to with films today.
You know, I watch Turner Classic Movies is kind of like on in my house all the time. That's the place that I go to, my happy place. And I've watched The Maltese Falcon probably, 10 times this year. Yeah. And there's no behind the scenes documentary on The Maltese Falcon. You know what I mean? I mean, they shot it on a lot in LA. Yeah. But or Casablanca or something like that, right? Yeah. You can find some stills. And if you want to learn about it, people have written books about it, but that's the only place that you can go.
Like Lawrence of Arabia.
Like Lawrence of Arabia. So there's no EPK crew following around, behind the scenes crew doing, even what Eleanor Coppola did with Apocalypse, right?
It's bizarre. It's like, although Hearts of Darkness or whatever that documentary is called is insane.
It is. And it's almost like if you said, which one do you want to watch right now, Apocalypse now or Hearts of Darkness? I'd be like, it's a coin toss.
Yeah. Whatever. Yeah, it is literally that good. Yeah. I mean, like 100-day shoot on a film is long, like that's intense. And remember, they bring out at one point the 300-day cake on there. Yeah, and it's like everyone is just totally broken.
They all hate probably each other. Yeah, but they hate. Well, I mean, like they hated Spielberg. I know we're jumping all over the place, but they hated Spielberg at the end of Jaws. right?
Jaws, I don't actually know that much about.
Spielberg was 26, I think.
Right.
And he bailed on I think they had a couple of it wasn't second unit. They still had a couple of shots to get, but he left before they completed shooting, 2 days before they completed shooting, because he knew the crew was going to, they were going to have it out with him. They were going to get him. So he left, he flew, and he let his he let his AD finish it.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
Not something. It's a good move. It's a pro move. I mean, it worked for him, right?
It turned out well.
It turned out well. But so I think you were just to finish that point off. There's something about an absence of information and maybe not pulling the curtain back too often that makes people a little bit more interested. You said it makes it an event, right? There are podcasts right now, which you're being a part of one right now, but there are podcasts out there, film podcasts, that go into a deep dive on the film the day it opens.
Yeah.
I mean, the day it opens. So they've all seen preview screenings. And some of these podcasts I really like and I listen to, and I go back and I listen to old episodes of them or whatever. But I always wonder about that. They're like, okay, spoiler alert, and they give you the spoiler. And then it's up to you if you want to delay your gratification or not, depending on what the topic is. But I thought that was unusual.
It's very interesting from almost from a biological standpoint of what humans are able to ingest, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? We've only been reading for a few thousand years, but we've been Homo sapien for anywhere between 250,000 to 50,000 years. So we deal with sonic words better than read words. So I wonder if there's a volume of information at which it's it just kind of, the technology has surpassed our sort of biological limits, and it's just too much data. So you're just swimming in a sea of data. It's beginning to feel that way.
It is.
There's the system that we've built is much more complex than our ability to kind of get on top of it. So, nothing is special, nothing is novel or unique. It's just continuous 24/7, everything, whatever it is you're looking for.
It does kind of feel sometimes like we're constantly playing catch up.
Yeah.
And there's no possible way to get ahead of the wake, to get ahead of whatever's coming your way. I mean, I think I kind of gave up a little while ago. You obviously haven't, because you're a tech guy. You love the tech stuff.
Well, I definitely gave up to some degree. Well, I don't know if I gave up. I kind of lost interest in social media to some degree.
I've never been interested in it ever.
But what I am super interested in, and I think is one of the coolest things ever, is YouTube.
Yeah.
So YouTube, I'm kind of obsessed with, actually.
Can you save YouTube, do you think? I mean, I know that for a minute it looked like it was going to be the democratization of whatever, and everybody was going.
But that is what it is.
It's still. Is it still that? Yeah. Okay.
No, that's why I think it's so interesting.
It's the number one. I think it's still the number one streamer of music, I believe.
Probably.
I mean, I guess a lot of people get the wide variety of entertainment content and other content, social content from YouTube, right?
Well, it really. When you use the word democratized, I think and this actually ties a little bit into the the reading of Fangoria and Starlog. It's a similar thing where in previous to YouTube or the internet, you needed a giant machine like Hollywood or the music industry to market and propel and actually select the artist as well, right? To select the person, to build everything around them, to spend millions of dollars promoting them, and
filters.
And what you end up with is Madonna or Michael Jackson, and it feels and it's the same with films as well. You end up with Spielberg, or you end up with a handful of giant films, and what it looks like is happening is a kind of a decentralization where instead of 10 giant nodes that are Madonnas and Michael Jacksons, you've got 100,000 tiny nodes that each have their own audience that are kind of their own audience has discovered them, and I think that's more the direction that it's going, because something like YouTube, if you have content creators, it's if they're big content creators, they're probably signed with an LA representation firm, but they actually don't need to, and I think as time goes on, they probably will be signing with them less and less. Because they Mr. Beast, I think almost certainly has signed up with someone, but he doesn't need to, right? It's a self-fulfilling machine that he's built.
The same way that Taylor Swift didn't need a movie studio to release
Yeah.
era's movie.
Yeah.
That she just went directly to AMC or whatever it was and released it like that.
Because she has enough of a following. But I mean, in the opposite of Taylor Swift, what I mean is this, it actually is democratized in the sense that, like, if you're just really interested in this, whatever kind of plant this is, and you want to start a YouTube channel on that, there's a possibility you may get enough of a following that you can, like, pay rent.
Yeah.
Right? And that I don't know if that's happened before in like the history of the human race. So,
I remember when I was working at the publishing company Olé, we were trying to do our best to get eyeballs on different artists that I would interview. I talked to Keith Urban, I talked to different people, different Bob Lefsetz, influencers and musicians, artists, creators. And I remember my screen door at my house broke. And I went on YouTube to try and see if I could get a little tutorial on how to fix this screen door myself, right? And the guy, I think our Keith Urban video, 40,000 views or something like that. The guy who on YouTube,
there was a screen door video with like a million views. You see where I'm going with this,
I know. This guy was not camera ready or camera friendly or anything, just an old guy in his house. But the way that he mapped it all out for you was so digestible that I fixed my own screen door, felt very good about it. And I looked and he had something like 80 million views for this. And this is for one video.
It's my absolute favorite thing.
A lot of screen doors in the US and Canada and around the world, right, that need to be fixed. And
I think
that opened my eyes to the power of it.
It's hard also to kind of mentally understand those statistics.
Yeah.
It's like, because if you have a large summer blockbuster film, it's still not as many views as like what could potentially be like one of the YouTube unboxing videos of like a water gun,
Yeah.
Like, it's a really strange thing to wrap your head around, and it just didn't exist before.
Yeah.
So the size of their audience is totally massive, and if they're, I mean, this is the other thing that's interesting is the content creators that are doing well are being selected for doing well by the actual audience. Right, where in the film industry, and maybe because I don't know the music industry like I know the film industry, but maybe the same thing is happening where the film studio or maybe the record executive is basically future guessing who they think is going to resonate with the audience, right? And like the best studio executives are probably very good at making that prediction.
Yeah. Or they've got a track record of lucky
but
things.
In YouTube, it's like, it's actually the audience, right?
So it's a true democracy.
So
you're right. I picked the right word before.
Yeah.
That's, so this is a good thing, because I know that a lot of people were, you said you're a big fan of social media.
Super good thing.
But that's true for social media as well, right? But it can be a little bit more
Social
callous.
media is different though, because it introduces a kind of extreme narcissistic angle. And so there's definitely some other human psychology happening, I think, with social media that maybe is a bit more toxic than YouTube. But I mean, obviously there's benefits as well. I just like, I don't fully know how to interact with it, because you go down weird rabbit holes.
You go down weird rabbit holes unintentionally as well. And you come up and you see, man, okay, she's pretty and she's doing a thing. And then maybe you go and check out her page and she has the person you've never heard of, who's very cute, and there's a lot of them on the on like TikTok or Instagram, whatever. She'll have 2 million followers, and she's not a household name. Nobody's ever heard of her. And then you think, okay, is it just sex that's selling this stuff? Mm-hmm. Let me go and look. And then you see some quirky dude that likes to train spot.
Yeah.
And he's got 30 million followers or something like that on Instagram. So you're like,
but the train spotting, no, it's not. The train spotting one, I mean, that's a little bit more YouTube-esque, which is the one that I like, right?
Yeah.
Not that there's, I mean,
so there's a sex element to it, but there's all I think
there's a narcissistic element.
Narcissistic is huge.
Because it doesn't necessarily have to be sex. It can also be, it can be a variety of things. Yeah. But it's harder to see the benefits immediately, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And it does start with somebody thinking this has to be interesting to other people.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying before about us being Homo sapien. It's like we're used to living in tribes of, 150 people on like some Paleolithic plateau, right? Yeah. And it's like now all of a sudden you have 2 million followers that are all kind of worshiping you the whole time. Like, I don't know if we're psychologically built for that. And we're only going towards that more. So I don't know what that means for society. I'm not sure what the when you throw AI into it, you throw in like crypto and like hyperinflation and like it seems like a very unpredictable, weird time that we're in.
You are somebody that's been known to observe what's going on in the planet and around you, and then put it into your art. Is this going to be maybe your next a topic that you might attack? One that you just said, maybe not being able to get ahead of technology.
I don't know. It's more interesting to just kind of like watch it. Maybe yeah.
Passive observing.
Yeah. I think in terms of like, I think I'm more drawn to allegory and metaphor than I am to like hard speculative science fiction.
Okay.
Speculative sci-fi is super interesting and super cool, but I mean, you know, I wrote this film that I sold to Columbia, which was I became obsessed with the Holodomor, which was the Ukrainian famine before World War II. It was like part of Stalin's 5-year plan, so it was like the early 1930s, and I wrote a science fiction version of that just because the real topic is so difficult, it's so painful and like difficult to deal with that sometimes the veneer of something like sci-fi or fantasy is an interesting way to kind of look at things that have happened. But I think speculative futuristic science fiction is hyper interesting. I'm just not necessarily geared towards it exactly.
Well, when did you know that was your lane? Because that is such I mean, I don't want to say, there's nothing convenient about it, but man, there's not a lot of people who are doing that, because speculative sci-fi, I think, is maybe what hooked me originally, right? Blade Runner was an idea of a future Los Angeles.
Yeah.
That
well,
looked,
it was Philip K. Dick, right?
That's right. Yeah. Who wrote it in the 60s, right? So
it was, do electric,
do androids dream of electric sheep? Yeah.
But no, I think, for me, it's not about a lane. Like I'll do anything. I mean, I went off and made YouTube videos for 5 years instead of working in Hollywood, right? So I don't have a lane. I don't really care.
No. I mean, I didn't mean that as kind of like trying to put you in a category.
What I mean is I've never this is the first time I've consciously said like I'm more interested in metaphor than I am in speculative sci-fi.
Yeah.
But I just when you talk about where AI is going and like where the planet is going, it's like I'm more interested in, you know, you could say it's the fall of the Roman Empire, it's the fall of the Greek Empire, like it's the fall of, you know, whichever one you want to pick, and the similarities are super similar. You know, there's a lot of commonality between where we are and where they were, right? So looking back sometimes can be sort of a foretelling of the future, and that really interests me.
Well, I mean, everything is the cycles, cyclical things in storytelling for sure. And I mean, you were able to do that with District 9. You were able to take things that you grew up around and saw, and then
it's why a sequel to District 9 is so hard.
Of course.
Because it kind of just said everything it was meant to say.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
And I mean, people will continue to ask you about that, and that will continue to. So that's not something you wake up thinking about. This isn't something that drives you forward, knowing that, I mean, out of the gate, you had this Oscar-nominated property that people still reference as one of the great modern science fiction films.
Yeah, I think I'm very drawn to that world. Like,
Me too.
I would love to play in that science fiction world. The complexity around District 9 is, it's so laden with political complexity that you can't go and just kind of play around in there in the way that you can with a different piece of science fiction IP that's like more playful, right? Yeah. Even though it appears playful and it appears satirical, it's based on like really hard South African history.
Yeah.
So whatever, and it was a direct metaphor for several elements of apartheid and kind of, you know, growing up there and just like experiencing SA in the 80s and the 90s. So I would like to go back to it because I like the world so much and I like what it's saying. Yeah. But it's kind of, South Africa is also changing at a very quick rate, right? Like politically it's changing, and you have to be really precise about what it is that you're saying and what the film means, and you know, you can't just like wing it. So I actually, when I used to be obsessed with the LA riots, just because of America's complex history, and there was a piece of me that wanted to do a sequel that was set in America, actually. Like I think in the near future we'll probably make something. It just has to be the right. It has to be very intelligently thought out.
It's interesting that you bring up the LA riots, just that because that was kind of like early days of the internet. This was something that was on every channel everywhere, and we were, no matter what age you were, it was impossible to avoid at that time. So.
But wasn't it kind of pre? It was pre-internet. Though,
it was
right?
pre. It was pre. Well, just like I remember,
it's like 91.
It was pre. Like that's what I mean. Early days where it wasn't like sharing things. It was more like
but in South Africa, we also we got that American news. You know?
Yes,
but like I was like 11 or 12 when it was happening, but it was later that I became really interested, and I'm just super interested in Los Angeles as a city as well.
Yeah,
which actually has a lot of commonality with Johannesburg. Like they're very similar places.
Is that right?
Yeah, super similar.
Like how is that? Just with zoning or lack thereof?
Honestly, they're remarkably similar.
Is that
actually.
right? Huh?
Yeah, it's obviously LA has an ocean and Joburg is landlocked,
Yeah.
but they're both sprawling Mediterranean climate freeway cities with police choppers and razor wire and like massive wealth discrepancy. So they're very, very similar.
Did you taking the stories that you were influenced by or absorbed growing up in South Africa when you made District 9, was there anybody who was skittish about you using that inspiration for a story that seemed maybe that could be taken as a science fiction kind of
I mean,
fun film?
The saving grace, like the reason that film exists is Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh, right? So there's no way that a Hollywood film studio would have let me make that. And also, by the way, on top of it, one of my childhood friends was the actor who hadn't acted in anything.
Yeah.
So the levels of like impossibility are stacked high on that film. So it's honestly Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh, and it was their legacy in Hollywood that let the film studios have a sense of like confidence in what was being made.
To tell an allegorical story like that, metaphorical stories like that so well out of the gate at such a relatively young age, using the technology you had at your hands, but using it with discretion, to the point where it looks as good today as it did the day it came out, and better than a lot of things that are coming out today, using technology and digital technology. As a storyteller, I remember a Ray Harryhausen quote where he said one of the reasons why he didn't become a director, where he just concentrated on the VFX
stop motion
world and stop motion and everything, video effects, stop motion. One of the reasons why he didn't become a director was because he didn't have the patience for people. You know, so he was like an editor.
He's wise. Yeah. He's very smart.
I thought you might say that.
Yeah.
But you know,
I met Ray Harryhausen.
Did
actually.
you really?
Yeah, when I started, because when I came to Canada, I went to film school for animation.
Yeah.
And then I worked at a company in Vancouver doing computer animation.
Yeah.
And he came up for a couple of days to that company, so I got to meet him, which was pretty awesome. It was really cool. But I can really relate to that because, you know, I think that directors that come from the more visual, artistic side of filmmaking rather than theater, or or writing, like tend to be more isolationist in the way that they create artwork. And especially with computer graphics, it's like you can do everything, right? Like you design the character, you design the character's wardrobe, you're in charge of lighting, you're in charge of all the cameras, you're literally in charge of everything. And Harryhausen's version of that was kind of no different. It's if he wanted to make a short film that was entirely his, he could make the whole thing on his own.
Yeah.
Right. So I can absolutely relate to that. And like George Lucas is also famous for, George Lucas has done that so many times where he's told other filmmakers that, but he's also told actors. You know, I think he told Ewan McGregor, I think, that it's like he's like, man, if I could just figure out a way to just like make this not with you or any other actors, it would just be amazing.
Yeah.
It's like,
which is not true.
Well,
which it's not, because he almost did figure out a couple of ways to do stuff without putting actors in it, and it didn't work out so well for him.
Computer
sure,
generated.
Jar Jar, whatever have you. Right. I know that's, but I mean, I'm a Star Wars guy. I've got a T-shirt that says I love all 3 Star Wars movies. I mean, I like that. I like the world a lot, the original world, and that was the thing that made me fall in love. With that to me wasn't a creation; it was a reality.
Yeah,
that I'm like, oh my god.
I think I was the same as well. Like Star Wars was a massive influence. I think. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. It's almost like a world that your mind could enter as like a young creative person that just kind of rewired your head almost. Like, how is this possible?
Like the idea that human beings got together and created this, like with trucks and took stuff and built that never crossed my mind when I was watching it. I know I was 6, but I mean, it was still a thing. But George Lucas, I mean, I think we know now from the way the curtain's been pulled back with Star Wars was that he was forced to use a guy in a monkey suit. Chewbacca was like not what he would have, chosen if he had more stuff at his disposal.
You mean like today's technology?
Sure, yeah. And Chewbacca is one of the most lasting characters in cinema history. So all of these things that restricted his ability to go out and do whatever he wanted made this incredibly tactile film. The fact that he had to build an entire Millennium Falcon made so that they could shoot all around it.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to what we started off by saying, which is that when I got into computer graphics and visual effects, it was basically like this wild west of it was an uncharted, unknown industry that was figuring its way, through the jungle. And today there's like 100 VFX companies in Vancouver, and there's like 100 in every city, and it's like a sausage.
They're all very busy.
It's a sausage factory, right? It's like there's nothing special really about it. And it's almost more interesting to go back to like older techniques, like stop motion or model miniatures. Like these things are like more interesting now because they're more. Firstly, they're more tactile and they give the audience something that feels very like real. But also, just if you forget the audience for a second, the making of the film with those techniques now, it creates a scenario where you feel like you're rediscovering something or you're learning how to do it, right? Where CG is just, it's almost as common as like any other part of filmmaking. It's just like, now you do this and then you do this, and like it's too formulaic. Everything has become too formulaic.
I think in some of the things that I've read about you is that you saw visual effects and that as a gateway to getting into directing. So this is what you wanted to do. You wanted to tell stories.
For sure. No, I've definitely always. I mean, filmmaking is this like really amazing thing. It's very difficult, right? Like, so sometimes you're like, maybe the Ray Harryhausen approach of being more of an individual artist is like, it's a very appealing thing because directing naturally means that you're interacting with like 200 crew members, right? And there's a lot of pressure, and it's like when pressure is on, you're also trying to be creative at the same time, and creativity and being a general of an army don't really go hand in hand. They're not the same. They're not exactly the same thing. So directors, basically what you're doing is like you're saying, let's take 100 people that are highly creative, and then let's filter those. Let's put them through a stress test to figure out like which 8 of them are okay with deadlines and pressure from the studio and pressure from actors, and like
no sleep.
You're losing the sun. You have no sleep. Yeah. So and it's like I'm somewhere on that spectrum where, and also because I used to do computer graphics, it's like there's a piece of me that's like it's a lot more comfortable to just go back and be able to just like do this on my own and just have like 10 people see it.
Yeah.
But when you're in a theater and you watch a film and you've like climbed that mountain and come out on the other side, it's also obviously it's like very gratifying. So, I mean, I guess this is more of a philosophical debate about life rather than like just directing. But I understand the George Lucas and Ray Harryhausen thing. Like, I really get it.
Well, I mean, George, I think they both were. It was required. Collaboration was required of them because of what they were working in. But I mean, when I think about some visual effects people now, even going back to cell animation and things like that, there were people in cubicles.
Yeah.
Like just focused on, micro focused on one little thing. Editors in music, even in the world of music, but they're in dark room. In television, if they're editing a show, your editors that you work with often are by themselves in a room for long stretches of time, just micro focused on something.
Yeah, it's
and
true.
that's not what you can do as a director. Even though you may have written the script, you're producing it, so your locations, you're worried about the finances of everything because you're involved in that side of things, and you're kind of telling the actors how to emote.
I'm only interested in the financial side of it because the more you can control the budget and keep it down, the more the studio will be off your back, right? So it's like it comes from a place of just kind of trying to be left alone.
Yeah.
And obviously when the budget starts climbing, like you have like a host of different
But you're
problems.
aware of it, as opposed to go back to Coppola on Apocalypse Now, where they were going to shut him down a bunch of times.
Yeah.
And they're like, I
think Coppola may have spent a lot of his own money, I think, on Apocalypse Now.
He did, yeah.
Which he's just done again now with
Megalopolis. Yeah. Interested in that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Me too.
I have a very close friend who worked on it and really likes it. And I mean, Coppola is awesome. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
The storytelling aspect of it when you were a kid, what were the, would you consider yourself a storyteller first and foremost? I know it's
I guess.
Yeah.
I guess so. Actually, it took me a hell of a long time to figure out why I'm interested in directing films. I think I only figured this out like within the last 24 months.
Okay.
But this was the conclusion that I came to because I'm like, why? And this is my conclusion. It's for every human views the world and comes to conclusions about life, right? And I think the reason that I'm interested in directing films is because it's like, this is how I view the world through my eyes, if anyone is interested. That's the closest thing that I can come to a conclusion about like my own version of why art or expression is interesting.
Yeah.
There's no, so I suppose I'm a storyteller, I guess. But it's like, District 9 is a really good example, or, some of the Oat Studio stuff that I did where it's like, this is how I see things.
Do you think that's similar to a songwriter thinking, I got to get this off my chest, I'm going to write a song about it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like a painter wanting to paint.
I don't know.
Getting something, I got to get this out. Because some people,
I think it has more in common with songwriters, I think, than just a pure visual artist.
Yeah.
Which I'm incredibly drawn to being. Feels like a different circuit. It's a different
Less collaborative.
neurological thing. There's something else happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I don't think that you're, at least for me, you're not painting a painting or doing a computer generated still image necessarily to express the same thing that I'm expressing when I'm doing a film. It feels different, and it feels more in common with a songwriter.
Yeah, I think you're right. And there's usually, though I do know some songwriters who write by themselves, and then they need a producer or an engineer or something like that, and it becomes collaborative at some point. But
Right.
I also know a lot of people in the physical arts, like painters or sculptors, who are sometimes reticent to even show their art to anybody.
Yeah.
And nobody will ever see these certain
you see,
paintings.
I find that super interesting.
I know, right?
Really, really interesting. Like my daughter is a singer-songwriter, and I often say to her that like that profession or a visual artist or an author are hyper interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because you can just literally express yourself the way that you want. And if you can produce your own music, you can just be in this self-contained creative bubble where like you can just make the thing that you want to make. That's the downside with directing films, is that you can't do that. Like you have to mount finance and crew, and like it's a whole other different thing.
Well, I mean, and then unlike District 9, your creation, when you talk about something like Gran Turismo, you can still express yourself visually.
Yeah, Gran Turismo was a totally different thing. I mean, that was actually like a really interesting sort of psychological reason to do it, which is, I was just talking about the Holodomor film that I wrote, right, which is super dark, and I feel like I'm some mixture. I guess all humans are, but I'm some mixture of being very negative and pessimistic about the human race, and then and existence in general, and then mixed with like very jovial and very like, I don't know, positive and sort of happy, right? And there's a mix of those two things. But I've noticed that the stories that I'm interested in telling, or the stuff that I write, like everything is rooted in like a sort of a deep something that is deeply unfair, or there is a lot of suffering, right? And so with Gran Turismo, what happened was, I thought there was no way I was going to direct that. The studio was like, "Do you want to direct this?" And they sent me the script. And when I read it, it was like, it occurred to me that there was absolutely no chance in my future that I was ever going to direct anything that felt like the same sensation that I had as a teenager when you would walk out of films like Rocky or something. Yeah. I was like, there was no future in which this was happening.
Yeah.
And I read it and I was like, oh, this is kind of inspirational. Like, this is actually, I actually would like to have done one film that, you know, maybe would inspire a 13-year-old that wants to become like, I don't know, like a GT4 racer or something, to get into it.
Yeah.
And I was like, let me just try that. Let me see if I can create the same feeling that I had when the way that I went into that movie was like polar opposite to the way that I've done anything else.
Yeah, well, I mean, that makes sense. But you said this with the singular arts, if you have to get something off your chest and you're using a painting, or you're using dark colors, or you're bleeding things together, that's different than, first of all, it's different than the collaborative process that is filmmaking to begin with. But if you're starting with a script that you, maybe your wife, have written together, that's different than the studio coming to you and saying, hey, you want to do Gran Turismo? Yeah, this is a completely different artistic endeavor.
That's different as well, but they could have also handed me a script about like, you know, like a really dark World War I trench warfare story that I could have seen myself doing. Like, oh, okay, that fits into what my thing is.
What you're saying is you've got range.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that I did, but it's like let's try to do something where you come out of the theater feeling good.
Yeah,
what would that feel like?
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, that was the impetus behind GT.
I know what you mean,
and I love cars. That was the other reason, was cars.
And so want to dig into that a little bit. I mean, because we loved Fangoria and cars.
Yeah.
I think my bedroom wall had a bunch of pictures that I took out of Fangoria and then out of Car and Driver and Road and Track and Automobile Magazine and stuff. Where does that love come from?
My dad was really into cars.
Yeah.
And I've tried to figure out if it's because of him or because of just the fact that I like engineering and stuff. Like one example, like if you, I had a car that that I felt like when I was driving it in a city got too much attention, and it was uncomfortable, and I didn't like it. My assumption was that people would be like, that guy has that car because he wants people to see him in that car, right? And so I was like, is that true? Like I was trying to figure that out, and then
convertible?
No, it wasn't convertible.
Okay, so you can still hide.
Yeah. But so this is the conclusion that I came to is I'm obsessed with radio controlled helicopters.
Yeah.
And I have two choppers they're 6 feet long with proper jet turbines. Gee. And no one sees those, right? And it's like they're not a statement of any kind.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's why I like cars. It's the same thing. It's like a mechanical engineering thing. It's not, I don't think it's anything else. It's like design meets engineering, and there's like a beauty in that. So it's some version of that.
Okay, for one of the models in Chappie, they were bouncing around with a bunch of different. The big police one that Hugh Jackman.
Yeah,
there's a name for it. It's not the
moose.
The moose. Pardon me. I should know. Canada. The moose. Come on, let's go. It's got the spray painted moose on the side and everything. But I think they were banging around a bunch of different ideas, and different artists were coming at you with different designs, and then you put something together yourself.
But that was in a computer.
Right. That's
bashed,
okay. Yeah. But you were still using, but weren't you using like actual realized digital versions of pieces from cars? And
from a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But like, so in the 70s, Industrial Light and Magic, when Star Wars was made, they created this, it may have been before ILM, but they made it famous. And the term that they used was kit bashing, right? So the Millennium Falcon or you know, any vehicle really from Star Wars is thousands and thousands of resin kits of mostly World War II vehicles glued together.
Some Spitfire shit.
Yeah.
And
No, for sure. Yeah. Like there's Messerschmitt stuff on there. There's everything, right? So that's kit bashing. And you can do kit bashing in 3D on a computer the exact same way. So you know, like in Elysium, kind of the CIA or NSA building on the ring that Jodie Foster worked for, I had a really particular design in my head for what that building looked like that I gave to the VFX company. Because normally you work with concept artists and, you know, they do like awesome work and then you choose something.
Yeah.
But if I want to be ultra specific, then I'll model it in 3D and give it to them. And I used kit bashing because it's my favorite technique. And I gave the VFX company in Vancouver the 3D file. I was like, here's a 3D file. And the VFX supervisor told me a few months later, he's like, you know, when we took your file apart, we found like a 100-meter long spade in the building. And it was because I took a Bradley fighting vehicle as one of the millions of things that I had used to kit bash the building.
Yeah.
And I just selected a bunch of polygons, and like part of it had, because you know how those Iraq fighting vehicles, they have like spades on them, right?
Okay.
Spades and tracks and all this other shit.
Yeah.
So there was a giant, and then and you play with scale too. So I scaled it up for a different part. It was probably like the radiator heat sink thing.
Yeah.
And underneath it was a fan or a spade that was just embedded into the building. So you get these like weird anomalies, that happen in kit bashing that are pretty hilarious. And if you're looking out for them, you can see it.
And obviously there's purpose to it, but it's what creates, it's the part of the world building where something just doesn't look like it looks when we step outside our homes right now.
I think what happens, and this depends on the kind of artistic look that you're going for, but I think there's something that happens where when you use a lot of geometry that people are used to seeing, and it has a sort of an industrial or utilitarian feel to it, humans accept that as being believable, right? But again, it comes down to the look that you're going for. So like I'm interested in just hyper real feeling technology. But you could direct a film that, like I just saw Poor Things. Have you seen Poor Things? Yeah. Right. So that's a totally different steampunk aesthetic that's like equally satisfying and equally cool. Yeah. But it doesn't look real. It just looks super awesome. In a different way.
It's like the original Wonka, like the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory kind of vibe to it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll love that. You're telling a story on so many different levels. You have the story that you're telling, which is actually the interaction of the human characters, or non-human characters in certain instances. But then you also are telling a story, a visual story as well. There's so many different levels, and I suppose you could probably never sleep at all if you just stayed up and worried about the fact that every single choice you make, including music cues, the score, when you're working with the people who are developing that stuff, everything is telling us. Everything comes together to hopefully tell us a successful story.
The way that I think of it, definitely the older I get as a filmmaker, the more I think that the only thing that really does matter is the core story with the actors, and everything else is kind of it's a veneer. It's almost like it's a layer of paint. And like, obviously that layer of paint can and will influence, the setting, or it can influence the story to some degree. But you could imagine some of the world's best films have being set in different time periods, in different aesthetic looks. It's not about that. It's about like, because ultimately what you're doing is you're putting the audience through a simulated, it's like you're simulating for them what would happen if you went through this. So you don't necessarily have to go through it. It's kind of like sitting around a campfire, 25,000 years ago, and wrapping some nutritious information. Like, if you go out, you're going to get eaten by a cougar, right? But instead of saying to the children, instead of going out, you're going to get eaten by a cougar, you tell a 5-minute story that has the ending of like the child is lost and gets eaten by the cougar, and it's like it has more of an effect. So you're basically expanding that concept, and you're simulating for an audience like, this is what it feels like if you get divorced. This is what it feels like if your wife cheats on you. This is what it feels like if you do this to this person, And so all of the other choices, if you forget that core thing, these other choices, which are easy to overwhelm you, they're easy to get locked into the trap of, I'm so caught up in, the visuals of this thing or whatever else it may be, that you lose track of that singular emotional thing that you're trying to say. That's why 99% of films they're not the world's best films.
Yeah. This is something that I'm so happy that you said it like that. The people that you worked with on Chappie, there was quite a few where people were saying that your ability with visual effects is you've got a story that's the main thrust of everything, the human interaction. There's something that people can identify with situationally, maybe not at the time period, or maybe not the actual like geographic environment, but that it's a real human drama or situation that's going on. And then the other things around it, everything else that's around it, the world that you paint, the world that you build, is just to kind of propel it along a little bit. Yeah. Some color in the background.
Although in the case of Chappie, that may not be true.
Yeah.
but typically what you're saying is correct. Yeah. And like that's what directors should do.
Yeah.
But Chappie's such an anomaly. It's so outside of like the outside of the field of normal that it's an unusual one.
Well, I mean, but if you think about it as, a child developing and being influenced by parents and friends and what he sees on TV.
It is
and
a
what he
nature
sees,
versus nurture.
It's a nature versus
situation.
nurture story. And if you look at it like that, I think it's absolutely that.
See, this goes back to what you were talking about in the beginning with speculative sci-fi and metaphor and allegory is people will rightfully misinterpret that movie as being about AI.
Okay.
Right. And really a movie about AI would be like Ex Machina, right?
Yeah.
But Chappie is more, and I know that this really divided audiences, and like it's a film that has like a very controversial history. But where I was coming from with it was two places. The main thing was I'm very interested in Gnosticism, and I'm interested in the idea that like physical reality corrupts us from the moment of birth, right? So the soul is sort of pure, right? And you are sort of made impure through being born, essentially, and you only become more impure as time goes on, right?
Okay.
Because then you start introducing all of these other kind of these other elements that can make you less moral and less ethical.
We're not talking about original sin here, are we? Maybe a little?
I'm not that familiar with all of the Bible references.
Okay,
And like I didn't grow up religiously, so I need to kind of actually learn a bit more about that. But Gnosticism is they were burned at the stakes actually by Christians. But the thing with Gnosticism that is so interesting is because I think the soul is pure, or like the consciousness is pure, right? So I wanted to, you could, again, because there's just a veneer painted on top of the story, you could tell that story with a child. It could actually just be a child, which tells you it has nothing to do with AI, right? So you're watching the development of a soul, and the soul is like extremely pure and naive, and it can be manipulated, and it just happened to be born into an absolutely god-awful shit family. That's basically what that story is. And then it just like goes off the rails. So that was the one part of it, was this Gnostic, very extremely philosophical component, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum was an almost antagonistic approach to the audience, right? Or by the way, maybe even the studio, where it's like, this is going to be the most absolutely insane thing that I can possibly get away with. And
I felt beat up a little bit. I'm like, oh my God, this poor guy.
I read one review of it that was like, it almost made the whole thing worthwhile, because like in general it was like panned, and a lot of people don't dig it. But there was a review from Uproxx that was like, it hit the nail on the head so perfectly that I almost need to like buy that guy like a bottle of wine or something. Like, it was just so perfect. I should print that actually and mount that review, because it was like, that is exactly what the film was supposed to be. I just wish more people dug it. And I think I tell
you what, man, there were a couple of times where I felt beat up by it, like just because
emotionally,
you had brought me in emotionally.
Yeah.
You brought me in there, and you're looking at this, and I actually, like, as a grown man watching this thing, I had to tell myself, it's not real. It's a movie. That robot that's being abused right now is a robot and not a sentient being or whatever. I know it develops in a certain way, but while I was doing it, in order to protect myself a little bit while watching it, and then at the end, I mean, I found it to be an incredibly happy and satisfying ending. Yeah. I mean, the fact that, and
I mean, it's definitely a very weird film. Like, the example that I give is, like, obviously people always bring up District 9. I think Elysium is actually one of, I would like to make Elysium into a sequel more than anything else that I've worked on.
Yeah.
But anyway, the point that I'm trying to make is, Chappie is the one where, when I get, like, a concept artist a few years ago was in MIT, and he sent me a photo from like their machine learning room that had a hand-drawn stick figure of Chappie.
Okay.
Right. In MIT on their wall. And I'll get sent photos of people that have Chappie tattoos. Yeah. Like a lot. Like much more than the other films.
The design of Chappie is beautiful.
But what I'm trying to say is, way fewer people like it, but the people that like it more.
Yeah.
And so it has this kind of looking at the data behind it is very confusing because it's like, I guess in a sense, that's probably what it was supposed to do. It was made for like an ultra niche audience, I guess.
This is based on
Which is, by the way, dumb when it's like costs that much.
This is based on your original design though, right? The Chappie design is yours.
Actually, I'm obsessed with anime and manga. And there's one of my favorite designers created a series called Appleseed, and which is totally Japanese. And there's a robot human character in it called Brarios that has those ears. So it's a very much a nod at Japanese animation or manga.
Yeah. Just with the different Honda robots and things that we've seen over the years as robotics has evolved, there's a real beauty to what you did there, though. And I'm not surprised there are tattoos of that out there. It's gorgeous, it's colorful and everything. It's great.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't think so.
I know. I'm aware of the history of the film, but I was just like, oh, give me some more of that.
Yeah.
Give me some more.
It's weird, like how much joy I got out of it. It's bizarre. It's like, it's so exactly what it was meant to be that it still cracks me up. I don't know what it is about it. It's just funny to me. Like, I think marketing didn't help it because they tried to set it up like it was serious science fiction that was like saving the planet or something. I mean, it was totally insane how it was marketed. So that didn't help it. But, you know, I do think that it's generally not liked because of the film that it is. Like, I'm not going to blame marketing for it.
Do you think it's your most personal film?
It could be.
It might be.
Yeah, it could be.
Because your music, you said you were listening to a lot of Dantword, I'm saying that right? That group, which I was aware of, and that's a very specific sound. Yeah, and there's a very specific kind of like mechanical nature to their music that obviously fit into what you were doing.
Well, actually more, I mean, you know, music was a big part of it, but more it was this idea of just trying to do something as absolutely insane as possible. Like, like in a world where you have a very formulaic cookie cutter approach to Hollywood or whatever it may be, that film just doesn't follow the rules, right? It doesn't. And it's like to have a robot raised by that rap duo. It's like, I'm still stoked creatively about that.
Yeah, the fact that he still has the gold chain on at the end and stuff. Yeah. I'm kind of like, it's impressive. Okay, so the fact that it had the reaction that it did, maybe that and it's so personal to you, does that change your direction as you move forward? I've had this conversation with songwriters a lot, right? Like when you hit on something out of the gate, when you get a number one on your first album, your first release, which you did, you know, with District 9, you get your number one out of the gate, you get nominated for Academy Awards, and this is looking good. Things are looking good, and then you do something that's incredibly personal, and it doesn't get the reception maybe that not that you're hoping for or whatever, but just that the industry thinks that you're going to get. So, sometimes songwriters might say, okay, I got to take my foot off the gas a little bit. Get a bigger, scan the horizon a little bit more to figure out where I should be going next.
It depends where you want to go. See, that's the thing that's interesting, right? It depends what you want. Like, you could make much more finely tuned sort of, you know, metronome specific movies that follow a formula that you kind of know works with an audience and doesn't take risks, but it kind of like it fits within these parameters. It's like, you can do that, you know, but it's like, I'd rather be beaten up and be kind of like down on the ground bleeding, doing more kind of screwed up artwork, and 1 in 5 is like really hits it big with the audience. It's way more interesting to me.
Yeah.
And that just makes you evaluate who are you making the film for, which is what led to the conclusion that I was saying, where it's like, I think I'm making films so that audiences can see how I see the world, if anyone is interested. That's kind of where I ended up. Which is a different thing too. I want to make a film that the audience is really gonna like, and I'm gonna try to do that over and over again. You can do that in certain instances, but it's like, how many times are you gonna do that where like, is each one of those really you then? You know?
When I talk to songwriters sometimes, and some people will say, hey, best song wins. So we're gonna go and get a group of people, of songwriters, and I really like that song, and I'm going to put that on my album, and maybe that's the hit. I, as a consumer and as a fan and of whatever entertainment it is that I'm consuming at the time, am much more interested in the artwork that's coming from the person So your voice as opposed to, or the songwriter, the singer's voice that I'm hearing it from, as opposed to some sort of a collaboration. I just picked that song that any number of artists could have chosen from. Due respect to songwriters and then putting it out there. And then they keep me in business. I work in radio right now. So we wouldn't be around if that wasn't the case. But you know what I mean? Like a singular voice with something to say is much more interesting to me as well.
Yeah.
And what you're doing is much more interesting than, say, some sort of just trying to make everybody happy and hit all the pleasure centers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about this a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I think
I would imagine you do.
AI also is about, like, we're at some kind of inflection point where a lot of the models, I think, that are going to be built are going to be smart enough to create. You basically, I think, will be able to fine tune it where you could say, like, create a track that would be, you know, a top 40, like, just charting massive track, and it will do that.
Yeah.
And we're in a weird place, I think, like, as creators, as artistic people, where we're about to maybe get replaced by technology that can do it better, which may actually lead to a backlash of the more personal stuff. If the machines can do stuff that you're just going to, like, you know, that equates to, like, some of the most popular sounding stuff that everyone unanimously agrees is, you know, it's like Blinding Lights by The Weeknd or something, you know, where it's like everyone's like, this is a massive track. But maybe that swings us back a bit. And it's like, what is the handmade, human-made, more personal version? Like, it could happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how long it'll take to generate a 2-hour film. But it's not far, you know, it's probably within 5 years, I think, that.
Like genre, noir, detective, futuristic, or period.
Yeah,
just kind of drop them all in.
Just enter a bunch of prompts and, like, let it render it for you. And, you know, like, I mean, it'll also merge with video games as well. So it'll be like, I want to go and experience a world kind of like Blade Runner, where I can solve, you know, I can solve a bunch of puzzles and play maybe sometimes more like a first-person shooter, and then go into more of a strategy thing. And it's like, okay, it'll just render it for you in real time and just expand forever.
Yeah. You mentioned Blade Runner again, and I think of the few things that I've read about you, you have said that that's one of your favorites, right? But that's one of the ones that stuck with you when you were young. Me too. It got me through university. I think I wrote 3 papers on it. Still watch it all the time. It's my favorite. And there you've got a noir thriller. Just happens to be set in 2019, the then futuristic Los Angeles. Yeah. It's got nothing to do with aliens. It's got nothing to do with the technology is happenstance.
It's true, but it's like the part, you know, what I was saying earlier about the aesthetic choices being like a layer of paint or a veneer, and on top of whatever the emotional core is. In this case, it's noir, you know, detective story. The thing that's interesting is, like, the way that the genre affected the story is Rachel as a replicant.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know what I mean? It's like, how do you write? It would be difficult to figure out how to make Deckard possibly a replicant and Rachel a replicant in a perfectly real noir setting.
Right.
But is probably a way.
Yeah.
But that's the interesting thing, is, like, if the film is, like, good enough that it can just be its own thing, set in 1930, but then, okay, it's also cyberpunk, you know?
You said that people ask you about District 9 and a potential sequel. You must have been paying attention when Denis Villeneuve was doing the sequel to Blade Runner.
I love that movie.
He treated the fans of it with respect. I thought awesome. I thought it was excellent.
I totally loved it. Yeah. I mean, I like all of his films, but I really, really, really love that movie.
You guys have that in common, I think, in that the visual medium and the way that he uses effects is it's very tactile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and photographically awesome. Yeah, you know, he's an awesome filmmaker.
Do you know him at all?
No, not really.
Not really, yeah.
No.
Another guy that came to mind when I was looking at your films was Gareth Edwards. I don't know if you're familiar with Gareth, but I was first turned on to him before Rogue One, before any of that stuff was Monsters.
Yeah.
And just in reading about him, like, he made this movie for next to no money, right? And then he was kind of like you in a room creating stuff,
doing VFX,
kit bashing or whatever it might have been, and I know there's some effects in there, but he did that thing that I think that you did with your not your student film, but the one that you did before.
Yeah, like
District 9,
Alive in Joburg.
The Live in Joburg, yeah. where you went in.
It's a very similar approach.
Similar concept, a bunch of handheld footage that you take back to your place here in Vancouver, I think, right?
Yeah.
And then you were just adding things into it that looked incredibly real.
Yeah. It's kind of, I mean, that whole approach of handheld, it's you know, as the technology catches up, it's just everything just goes back to storytelling again.
Yeah.
Because I think Jurassic Park was actually the first film ever where Spielberg wanted to move the camera when that herd of herbivores runs by them. And ILM was like, you can't move the camera, like they've got to be lock-offs.
Yeah.
And they actually figured out how to track the real life camera three-dimensionally and then drop the dinosaurs in so that it looks like they're standing on the same surface. So when I did Alive in Joburg, it was like that technology was extremely new. Yeah. It was, and that's why for a short film, like I was able to make District 9 out of it, was because it just was unusual. Like you know, you couldn't really make documentary stuff that seemed to have a lot of VFX in it. But now your iPhone will do that. I mean, there'll be like Snapchat like filters that are like as complex as that. So so then it goes back to storytelling again, where it's like the glitz doesn't matter. Like what is it that you're saying?
So you come out of every project, you come out of District 9 with elation, I would imagine. And you come out.
Well, it was painful to shoot, but I was stoked that people responded to it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I guess, you know, your first ones might be a little bit painful for different reasons. Maybe more painful certainly if people don't react to it.
Yeah,
you know,
that's true.
It's a good problem to have, I suppose. So every project that you have, you take something, I would imagine, with it, and it may affect the direction that you go. And coming out of Gran Turismo, what's the? I mean, I know you've done your digital projects as well, but. How did that one change what you're doing? Because I mean, you said your happy story, kind of like everybody came out feeling really, really good coming out of the theater and everything. How does that transform maybe what you want to sink your teeth into next?
Well, I mean, what I'm doing next is the stuff that I'm more naturally drawn to.
Okay, you
right. So it's more like where there's something sociological or human based about it that is a layer deeper than the story, and that's definitely the next thing that I'm doing. But I mean, that's naturally what I seem to be interested in doing. So I do think Gran Turismo is a total outlier, and like I remember being in the theater watching it, going like, I'm stoked that I made this. So someone's going to feel happy, you know, some 13-year-old watching this is going to feel happy coming out of the theater.
I felt happy watching it. Did it expand your palette? Did it expand?
I think so. I think so. It was much more like it had less visual effects, which means at that budget level, the production costs were quite high, and so I was playing around the way that directors normally do, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like normally what happens is I'm obsessed with helicopters, but I'll have less helicopters on set and less techno cranes and less of everything, so that maybe there's more VFX spend or even just less money in general, so I can make something like Chappie.
Yeah.
Gran Turismo was a little bit more like production heavy and more like how theatrical released films are traditionally made, right? So like it obviously felt like we didn't have enough money, but in comparison to what I'm used to doing, we had more money. And so it was interesting to just kind of like play at that scale a little bit more.
Were you surprised? Did you surprise yourself at how well you fit into that world of somebody coming to you and saying, "Hey, go do this"? And
it's easier. It's way easier. Yeah. No, it's much more difficult to make something more
in the studio system or whatever.
It's easier to make it in the studio system.
Is, yeah.
It's. I mean, all of the films that I made to some degree are in the studio system. It's just that, well, I mean, to some degree they are, but it's like if you're trying to go off to South Africa and shoot something like Chappie, it's just the approach is a little bit different to how we made GT.
Yeah. You play well with actors, obviously.
It's still hard though. I mean, it's like working with actors is difficult, and also like I was saying before, because I didn't come from theater.
Yeah.
I had to learn how to communicate with actors, you know, and actually sometimes I feel like I over communicate with them. You can a lot of the time you can just let them. This is not how I work, but like a lot of the time, I think they're really talented actors. They're going to get close to what you're looking for just on their own, you know. So you don't need to like just overload them with notes, which maybe sometimes I feel like I do.
Yeah.
But
well, they can do with it the information what they will, right? I guess.
David Harbour's performance in Gran Turismo was really good, and I love the lead kid so much, Archie Madekwe.
Yeah.
He was the only thing with him was that he absolutely hated getting in the car.
He did.
Hated being in the car. Like putting a cat in water level, hated it. But he was cool.
Which would work if you think about it in the real world as somebody who likes the gaming side of it and is like...
He hates games too. He hates games and cars and racing.
What?
Yeah. He's an actor. Like he's just not interested in that stuff.
I'm trying to think of, there's something that I just read recently. It was something about, I don't know if it was James Cameron, somebody who was hiring somebody, and they said, I hate water. And he's like, you're going to be perfect for this then. Something because it was exactly the opposite of what the film was going to be about. So your revulsion to this world is going to play well on screen. But
Cameron is one of my favorites.
Yeah,
I love Cameron.
There's a singular division as well, and he's got range. The guy's got some range, right?
Yeah, he's awesome.
He's awesome. When you look at something that's kind of almost complete, you're almost like, okay, print. The fact that you've had your hands on so much of it going through, so much of like the visual design of it, the VFX, the story, does it help to know all of those different rooms and what goes on in the different rooms, the effects rooms, the makeup room, particularly coming from visual effects, but does it help having been in those rooms at the end of other projects when you were younger, knowing what you can do when you're actually like setting out at the beginning of a film? Does it help knowing what they're going to have to deal with, what people in the VFX departments are going to have to deal with, or not really?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Huh?
I think that kind of is, especially
so the director hat is completely different than the VFX hat. Yeah.
Well, I think it actually often it can be detrimental. It can be a negative. Like again, everything just comes back to this idea of the story and the emotional. What is the emotional data that you are conveying? And if you're caught up in thinking about what the VFX department is going to do, like you're focusing on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So, and that can be a mistake that I've made, but you definitely, each director has sort of like strengths and weaknesses, and it's very interesting. I've often felt like editors and actors, and to a lesser degree, weirdly, writers make the best directors, because they are always focused on what matters.
Yeah.
It's like the DPs and the visual effects department and stuff. It's like they're not necessarily focused on what the audience is focusing on. The actor is, and the editor usually is, and weirdly the writer is. But like a lot of the time they don't. There's very few people that started as writers that make great directors. Yeah. There's a lot of writer directors, but. So I think the technical trades, kind of technical, whatever you want to call it, like the technical arts, it's not necessarily helpful. It's like you'd be better off fostering a very in-depth relationship with the actors and with the story and like what it is you're trying to say, and leave it to someone else. Hire a very good VFX person.
Really? Okay. Because I kind of thought that maybe the fact that you were able to kind of have that mechanical side might help, but you're like
look, it helps the imagery, right? Like my films feel the way that they feel and they look the way that they look because I do have an understanding of that.
Yeah.
But in the case of Chappie, it's like it doesn't matter that he looks totally photoreal. It's, by the way, he does.
He does.
He should have been up for way more awards.
I 100% agree.
It actually the VFX supervisor on Chappie, who's a pretty close friend of mine, was also working on The Revenant and the bear attack on DiCaprio. I don't understand or remember how, but they were occurring kind of at the same time, and that was the thing that got like way more acknowledgement than Chappie ever did, which makes sense in the grand scheme of things. But on a VFX level, it's like the work is very, very good, right? But anyway, I digress. The point I'm trying to make is hire someone to just do that stuff well, and I used it in a way that helped me in the beginning of my career. But I'd rather be a better storyteller than VFX artists.
I got you. I think that's fair. I think you may be short selling yourself just a little bit because of how I think you probably might be without even knowing it, a little bit more demanding or discerning about the way something looks at the final. I was going to the final product.
I'm definitely obsessed with it. I'm just aware.
And your obsession comes through in the final product because I am a bit of a stickler when it comes to that stuff. Even watching whatever stuff that's. I mean, was Chappie 2013?
Yeah.
So that's
it came out in 2015. It was shot
2015, shot in 2013. Yeah. So we got a decade. You would think things would have evolved and stuff. And there's lots of stuff that comes out now, and I'm just like, this is not good enough.
Yeah.
Just like when the feet of the ship land on that's a tough thing to do. I know it's a tough thing to do, but when the digital medium meets real, terra firma, it better look good, and it so often doesn't.
That's the stuff that's really interesting is when you're using mechanical effects on set to link it to a CG item.
Yeah.
So like, you're using like nitrogen guns or something to like blow dirt, or you have an SFX explosion or a mortar pot or something, but you know that it's for a CG element that's going to disrupt it. That is very cool and very fun on a technical level, as long as it serves the story.
Well, and I would imagine, I think sometimes directors who don't have the background that you have are just like, they'll take care of it and it'll look good. And that's not always the case.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah. That is true. I think the most successful recent film for me was probably Dune 2, or even the original Dune, Villeneuve's original Dune. Just in terms of like expert cinematography and visual effects, like extremely, extremely well executed. And it also feels like a director who's focusing on the right thing, and it's like he has the right people that are making the right choices in total, and it's like the aggregate is a very satisfying result.
He seems like a non-tortured human being as well, as do you. You kind of seem like non-tortured guys. Yeah.
I don't know about him, but I'm definitely slightly tortured.
Are you slightly?
Yeah.
It's that. So maybe that's where the good art comes from. A little bit of torture.
Yeah.
A little bit of torture. That's do you like working with the guys who put the music together? Do you like working with that part of it? Is that
sure.
Obviously needle drops are huge. And the songs that you pick are so important because that can be one of the things that ages a movie the worst. Like 10 years back, going and looking back at certain movies. But if they belong to the film in the time, often those choices are vital.
I actually want to do way more needle drop stuff going forward. The only film that really has needle drop music is Gran Turismo that I've done, because Die Antwoord was genetically part of Chappie, so their music was. But the other films are just score, right? Yeah. And actually, scores, I listen to scores probably as much as other genres of music.
So do I.
Because I love them. But going forward, I would love to use needle drop much more, I think, depending on the kind of film that I'm making.
Yeah.
But I was stoked with some of the stuff that we got for Gran Turismo, for what it needed.
That budget helps.
Yeah,
helps get the music in there.
It was $2 million over budget in music, actually.
Yeah.
So like the music expenditure was actually the only budget element which was over. But there were some expensive tracks in there.
Do you work with the people who are doing the score? Is that something?
Yeah, massively.
And when does that start?
Well, I mean, in a perfect world, it starts before you're even shooting.
Yeah.
So best case scenario is you have. Your composer is sending you stuff that you can listen to and give notes on before shooting or during shooting, so that you're already kind of very far down the line. But best case scenario is they're actually giving you entire sequences that are obviously not scored to picture, but that your editor can drop in. I actually prefer cutting to music.
I was going to ask you that.
I've never really liked just assembling an edit and then giving it to a composer. I don't think that that's the right way to do it. I think you have to like hear and build your cuts to something that exists.
Wow, I think probably in the history of film though, it was the other way though, right?
It's
like Ennio Morricone probably did most of his music afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. Traditionally, it's unusual, but I mean, with needle drop stuff, you definitely can do that.
Yeah.
And like I was saying, if they've written stuff ahead of time, you can cut to it. Like Lorne Balfe did Gran Turismo, and he did a bunch of stuff. I mean, most of what we were doing was very time. There was a huge pressure to get it done, but we did have tracks initially that we could cut stuff to.
Yeah.
So Yeah.
Do you think at all about a signature as an artist? Do you think of yourself that way at all? And after you have a few pictures, it's kind of like start thinking about legacy a little bit or anything like that?
I think, I mean, going back to the visual thing, I think I'm naturally so visual that I cannot really escape that. That aesthetic is just part of what I make. It's not even really like a choice. So I think that's some form of signature, I think, consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah.
But it's not as interesting as I'd rather have a bunch of stuff that spoke about very meaningful human things in a way that wasn't browbeating or like overly pretentious.
Yeah.
You know, like District 9 is a really good example, I think, of getting it right between talking about something very complex and weighty, but in a way that you're not beating the audience over the head with it. It's a very fine balance, and like I don't want to be pretentious.
There's a musical comparable to that where you know, a message, a song that has a message in it. Sometimes they can hit you over the head with the message. You know, whether it be about loss or some sort of charitable thing that it's been commissioned, that somebody's been commissioned to write a song about. But sometimes there are these songs that have a hook and a melody you can sing along to, and you might not even think about the message that the songwriter had intended while you're listening to it. But it's also beautiful, but also has this like deeply profound message in it if you decide to tap into it whenever. So
that's the best stuff.
That's the best stuff, right? Yeah, stuff that has legs. It's pretty cool, man. You're a singular artist. I'm really super stoked to get to talk to you, man. Thank you for being so candid and sharing. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. This has been Storytellers.